What's up, everybody? We have a great show coming your way today on GoJo and Golic. Lots of great guests to get to. Plus, we will talk the first iteration of the college football playoff rankings. And Paul George made his debut as a 76er last night. Kind of up and down. We'll talk about that game. Plus, Monday Night Football. The Chiefs get the win. Taylor Swift works her black magic. We will talk all about that game and some questionable decisions towards the end of that one. All that and more coming up on GoJo and Golic.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to GoJo and Golic. Mike Golic Jr., Mike Golic Sr., and Jesse Cofield here. We got a great show for you. We are presented by Campbell's Chunky, the soup that eats like a meal. As always, make sure you download, subscribe, rate, and review us. Leave us a 5-star rating, and check us out here live Monday through Friday from 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern on the DraftKings Network. Plenty of great guests coming your way. Adam Rittenberg, ESPN college football reporter, is going to stop by ahead of the first inaugural 12-team playoff committee rankings that are going to come out tonight. Charlotte Wilder going to join us back for a Charlotte Wilder Wednesday on a Tuesday. Steve Kornacki is going to join us for an update on battleground states heading into tonight. I don't know about you. I'm just totally kidding about that, by the way. I don't know about you guys. Last night during Monday Night Football, they popped an ad for the actual election coverage coming up today, and it gave me the most sinking feeling of dread, like a reminder of just how stressful today is going to be in so many ways. So, by the way, everyone who's listening right now, we usually, if you're catching us live and you haven't already, go out and vote. Do your civic duty. Take the time you need. Make your plan if you haven't already done it. There's plenty of states where you can still same day register to vote if you haven't already. So go and make your voice heard, do the right things, and get the sticker and post it to social media, because if you don't, you've never actually voted, Dad.
I'm honestly so excited, too, to stop getting the text messages, the political text messages that have been inundating our phones. It's like, oh, God, yeah, no, oh, God, I completely forgot about the election. Like, do they really think that getting a text on your phone is going to change anything? I don't know. It's driving me crazy.
I'm excited for two things. One, in Arizona, has to be the most TV ads per minute in the country. I can't wait. And I mean both sides. I'm not picking a side. Both sides. Just the ads to stop, and the frigging cardboard things on the corner that have everybody's picture on it. I can't wait till those are all picked up. But hey, as Mike said, civic duty, go vote. Let's, we have to go through all this. But how about tonight? I mean, obviously, the massive amount of people are going to be following the election. But if you want an escape into the sports world, you get the first college football committee ranking, which is a really important ranking to see where your team or the teams are put. So, I mean, you have obviously the monster election that will be covered, but you have games obviously as well, but college football, man, and the committee, they get to shine. Though they'll be lost in the election shuffle, they still will grab people that are just done with the election. They'll have heard all the ads, got all the text, went out and voted and said, you know what, I'll just wake up in the morning and see who the new president is, but I got to see where the college football committee ranked my team.
I'm just so excited for a day full of sports commentators making a bunch of ham-fisted political puns to try and tie it into the election the same way I'm going to hear when it's, why would you want to worry about battleground states like Arizona and Pennsylvania when you could try and figure out what the committee's going to do with two-loss Alabama? That's coming up with Adam Rittenberg in about 15 minutes. In the meantime, speaking of important decisions, what was Todd Bowles doing last night on Monday Night Football? Let's get to it. The Chiefs someone pointed out yesterday, I feel like the Chiefs have been winning the same game for like 3 years now, where on Monday Night Football, the Kansas City Chiefs win 30-24 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers team that in driving rain in Kansas City, Dad, down their two best receivers in Chris Godwin and Mike Evans, went out here and mounted an incredible effort to put on this show. Liam Cohen, their offensive coordinator, called an incredible game, and they were able to keep this thing close enough to win right up until the end, taking it to overtime, where the crux of our difficult decision-making begins with Todd Bowles. We'll get to that in a second, Dad, but overall, the Chiefs remain undefeated, and I think the big takeaway from last night for them would be the DeAndre Hopkins show is officially live in Kansas City, and my God, it looks better than I could have ever expected.
I mean, amazing. 8 catches, 86 yards, 2 touchdowns. That throw in the second quarter by Mahomes, stepping up in the pocket and dropping it in the basket with DeAndre being sandwiched by 2 defenders right at the goal line, was absolutely incredible. Great throw and great catch. But I mean, this is why they got DeAndre Hopkins, a guy you can trust on routes, a veteran you can trust that he's going to be where he's going to be. That's what Andy Reid does. That's what this organization does. Certainly, they've relied on rookies, Rashee Rice last year and this year until they got hurt. Isaiah Pacheco, a 7th rounder, but who came in and played early, but he's out as well. But you mix in the veterans you can count on, like a Travis Kelce, 14 catches. I mean, the oldest tight end ever have 14 catches in a game. So you find the people that you can count on. So just a great pickup that is paying dividends for a team that, nobody has really mentioned. Can they run the table? Because the way they're playing, there is like no thought that they can run the table. They've won 14 straight, but the last 8 they've won, they've come back from being down in the second half. You're just going to run out of space there at some point. They're undefeated. You have to give them the love for it. But boy, oh boy, do they make them interesting.
They do, but the thing you can say is after all that time, because Dad, people talk about, momentum and clutch gene and all that stuff. In my mind, it's always just really how many reps does your core have at certain situations? And the Chiefs have seen all of this. You get them in these tight situations at the end of games. The overtime game-winning drive is a perfect example, and they just click into their training. You see a couple of new wrinkle plays thrown in that they somehow haven't gotten to the entire game. And Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes just find a way to make plays because their heartbeat doesn't rise above a certain point when most other people clam up because, oh man, we've got the champs on the ropes. Look at this opportunity we have. And for Kansas City, this is old hat. And the guys that haven't been around there for that yet, i.e. DeAndre Hopkins, are still veteran enough or can just take their cues from the guys that have been there to make it happen. I thought Patrick Mahomes stated it best, Dad, after the game in the interview he did with Lisa Salters talking about DeAndre Hopkins. She asked him, what did DeAndre Hopkins show you guys tonight? And he said that he can win one-on-one. It's the exact thing we all said. This is why you brought DeAndre Hopkins over here, to give him a guy that he can trust in critical moments to go out there. And man, that pass that you talked about, that to me, trust is gained in drops, lost in buckets. that's a big drop in the bucket, watching what Mahomes was able to do. That's the stuff he does with Travis Kelce. That's the stuff that's earned over time. That was the old Tyreek Hill stuff. So to see it with a new receiver there has to make you feel pretty good. On the other side, Dad, the Buccaneers probably not feeling great after this one because they left it all out there. Again, can't say enough about Baker Mayfield, this team overall, the fight that they put on Cade Otton in the night that he had at tight end for them. But we know, Jesse, this all came down to the decision that got made at the end of regulation by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who went down, managed to drive and go and give themselves the tying score with the opportunity to go for 2, and then ultimately balked on that in favor of overtime.
Yeah, Todd Bowles spoke to the media afterwards and actually defended the decision. Take a listen to this.
Going for 2 after the touchdown there at the end?
Oh, very minor. We wanted to get it to overtime with the wet conditions on the field. We felt like we had to go in overtime instead of go for 2. So we had our shots, we lost the game.
I know in the past you've mentioned you had communications upstairs about decisions, analytically, things of that nature. Did they advise you not to go for 2? What was...
No, we went for 1. We took our shots. We had our chance to go game. We just lost the game.
I mean, obviously they ultimately lost, but in the moment, what do you guys think of that decision? The right move, or should he have gone for 2? Easy to look, hindsight's 2020. Easy to look at it and be like, oh yeah, they should have gone for 2.
I don't know. I was looking at that thing in real time and saying they should go for 2. And, Dad, this one is actually less an analytics question and more a vibes question because ESPN pointed out in Week 9, 4 teams that scored touchdowns in the last 2 minutes of regulation decided to kick the extra points to tie their game. ESPN analytics modeling agreed for the decision to kick the extra point in all 4 instances, but all 4 of those teams lost. Now, I'm not sure how many of those were road teams, but I would say this, Dad, this is just the classic, vibes case for going for 2 of, hey, you are the underdog team. You are undermanned on the road against a better team, and you've got them gassed after a long final drive. Take advantage of that and try and win on one play because the thought process is if you prolong this game, eventually the better team is going to win, and Kansas City is still, in fact, the better team.
So... I can look at this both ways. It didn't work. Jesse, as you said, hindsight is 2020. But all the elements of even before, again, analytics have been around forever. Even though before these new analytics came into play, it was always, if you're an underdog on the road, you go for 2. That was kind of been, for decades, it's kind of been the way. So I thought they were going to go for 2. It was a 13-play, 71-yard drive score with 27 seconds to go. So now while your team went 13 plays, the defense, went 13 plays as well. So now if you look to get the ball back, you just went 13 plays. So you may be a little worn out as well as the defense may be a little worn out. So I would have gone for 2. Again, I'm not saying this after the fact. I was saying it watching the game for all those elements that we talked about, underdog on the road. I don't know what the wet conditions really had to do when he brought up it was rainy and wet, what that had to do with anything, a long drive as opposed to one play from the 2-yard line. You had momentum. Run the play. Listen, if you don't get it, you don't get it. You got 27 seconds, you got an onside kick, and you're going for a prayer. But you could, then it literally comes down to a coin flip. And you could see on Baker Mayfield's face when they lost the coin flip. They had lost the coin flip. There was a close-up of Baker Mayfield's face just like, oh, my God, I can't believe Pat Mahomes is getting the ball first in overtime. I may not get on the field. And 11 plays and 70 yards later, it's exactly what happened.
Well, I mean, because he realized they already survived their flirtation with disaster. Lest we not forget, after Tampa Bay made the decision to go and kick the field goal or kick the extra point to tie the game, the Chiefs had another possession. They had a possession with 27 seconds left and all 3 timeouts, which is an eternity when you're facing Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, and their defense managed to go and slow that down and get them to overtime. but you're only going to get so many bites at the apple, and handing the ball to one of the most clutch quarterbacks we've seen and giving him opportunities to beat you in that game. And that, to me, as much as anything, Dad, is when you know you've got a quarterback of that caliber on the other side. For years, we always used to make the joke, oh, you left too much time for Tom Brady and the New England Patriots to go out there and potentially beat you. Why would you want to give a GOAT-level quarterback more opportunities to go out and win the game? That's the part that just doesn't make sense to me. So, Dad, we can obviously, and that will be a hotly discussed decision. It wasn't one that was surprising. I saw Ryan Fitzpatrick, who's familiar with Todd Bowles, say, I know Todd's not going to go for 2 in this. It was the ultimate defensive head coach move to make the hyper-conservative choice that's often associated with these guys. And so I certainly disagree with that now. But the one thing that was interesting to me coming off this game, Dad, is how we handicap the Tampa Bay Buccaneers' chances from here on out, because this was a team that still was able to move the ball incredibly well against a Chiefs defense that's one of the better ones in the NFL. And you look at the NFC South still, while, hey, the Atlanta Falcons are probably in the best position in terms of injury and health to go and take this. Tampa's shown, hey, they can be incredibly resourceful, and if and when they get Mike Evans back from that hamstring injury, this is still a team that, if they can just hold on close enough, might have a shot at a division that's one of the more chaotic in the sport.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to have a shot at the division. They're 2 back of Atlanta. They've lost to Atlanta twice already. So, I mean, that puts them behind the 8 ball as well. The wild card teams right now are 2-loss, 2-loss, 3-loss. So, and they have 5 losses. So, and when is Evans going to come back? Will he make it the rest of the season? Godwin, we know, is out for the rest of the season with the tough ankle dislocation. So I have a feeling their days are numbered. Injuries hurt them. This loss hurt them. This could have kept them at 4 losses, 1 away from Atlanta. Like I said, they've already lost to Atlanta 2 times. So I think it's going to be a tough road for them. I really do. I have a feeling, I can't. I have a hard time believing Mike Evans, when he comes back, is going to make it the rest of the season. He's been around a while. He's been nicked up, the hamstrings. It's a tough injury to come back from midseason and be full go. I just think I kind of now count them out of the playoffs. And I know there's 8 games to go. I get it, but I think it's just too much of a hole with the injury situation.
It is interesting, though, the way I feel about Tampa coming off this, and just in general about that team. In a year where we've watched so many quarterback contracts age somewhat poorly, at least in the immediacy after the fact. I mean, we'll talk about the Dak Prescott injury at some point here. Is that hamstring likely going to keep him out for some time? But even further than that, Trevor Lawrence having some struggles, Tua Tagovailoa getting another concussion and having his future called into question there. At the very least right now, especially based off the number that you got him at, Tampa fans can feel pretty good about their quarterback situation, because you look at Baker Mayfield and the chance he gives your team every time, where your team is winning in large part because of what your quarterback is able to do. Is he the most high-end talented guy in the world? Absolutely not, but he's tough as hell. This team feeds off of him, and he gives you great opportunities to go out there and try and win. Combine that with what they found in Liam Cohen as the offensive coordinator, and I do think you can feel good about the core of this roster, and just saying that, hey, you know what? Them's the break sometimes. Injury is going to undermine performance. You didn't full-on collapse like one of your counterparts in the South and the New Orleans Saints, and so you can at least walk through the rest of the season and say, all right, hey, if we slip down a little bit, we get another high draft pick to add to the pile here, and we make a run at this next year.
You know, and as I look, maybe I spoke too quickly. As I look, they have 8 games left. Only 2 of them are against teams with a 500 record and better. One's next week against San Francisco, who is sitting at 4-4. And then in a few weeks, they play the Chargers, who are sitting at 5-3 now. We'll see what they are when they take them on. Other than that, they play the Giants, the Panthers, the Raiders, the Cowboys, the Panthers, and the Saints. So the schedule is in their favor. So maybe I was a little premature with dumping them out of the playoffs with that schedule. They certainly could take advantage of it. And I agree with you. The value they got for that quarterback with Baker Mayfield. And again, I just love the guy. You just love his tenacity and his grit. You know, linemen love him, the way he leads. So maybe I was a little premature. I didn't look at their schedule. I just did and said, they could have an outside chance.
I guess for me, it's always just the vibe of the NFC South where, yeah, the Falcons are in control right now, but when has the Falcons being in command of a lead ever felt like something that you can trust or count on? Don't trust early polling there. You never know what can happen, and the NFC South bears testament to that. So that's been an extremely chaotic division, including as of late yesterday. We'll get to also the coaching decisions that were made. Dennis Allen relieved of his duties in New Orleans, the second time that he has been fired as the head coach of a Derek Carr-led team, which, man, if they both get a chance at a third here, someone needs to make the right decision and just leave because they both got the same outfit on, and they've never liked how this has worked out. So plenty more NFL news to get to on that front. But coming up next, we had a wild weekend in college football. We've already talked about some of it with the Ohio State win over Penn State, but there were a couple other big results. Clemson getting dropped this weekend, Texas A&M getting dropped. How will all of this impact and influence the first round of rankings by the College Football Playoff Committee? Adam Rittenberg will join us next to break that all down ahead of tonight here on GoJo and Golic. All right, welcome back to GoJo and Golic. Mike Golic Jr. and Mike Golic Sr. here. And as we've mentioned, the first round of the now 12-team college football playoff rankings are going to come out tonight. So we've got the committee with a very different task this year. And so for help wrapping our arms around that, excited to bring in one of our old teammates, Adam Rittenberg, ESPN senior writer covering college football over there. On the eve of the first round of this, Adam, with 12 teams in mind for the playoff, I guess, first off, I'm curious for your perspective. which team do you think is the most difficult to discuss for the committee right now as we've gotten through the first 3 quarters of the season here?
Yeah, great to be with you, Mike. I think in terms of the undefeated teams, it's clearly Indiana. They lead the nation in points margin. They've been more dominant than any other team in the country on a consistent basis, outscoring every opponent by at least 14 points. But you look at their strength of schedule, didn't challenge themselves in the non-conference, which wasn't a surprise given where their program was. And just the way the Big Ten schedule has fallen, they haven't faced Oregon. They haven't faced Ohio State yet. Penn State's not on the schedule this year. It used to be on the schedule every year. They have Michigan coming up this week. How much is that really going to help their resume? A Michigan team already with 4 losses. So I think in terms of the undefeated teams, they're the most interesting. And then you have some really interesting 2-loss teams. What do they think of Alabama? What do they think of LSU? Those 2 teams meet obviously on Saturday night at Tiger Stadium. And then an Ole Miss team, which has been really dominant, except for 2 games that they should have won, and 1 really bad loss at home to Kentucky. How do you evaluate Ole Miss? So I think, and certainly some of the other contenders in the Big 12 and the ACC. I mean, there's this growing sense, guys, that those leagues may only get 1 team in. But is there a possibility for an at-large? I think that will reveal itself to an extent tonight.
Yeah, and more than a few of it will be handled on the field. LSU, Alabama is basically an elimination game. One will have 3 losses. And for Indiana, we can talk about their schedule, but they get to play Ohio State November 23rd on the road. So that would be a monster win for them. Who's the best 1-loss team in America?
Yeah, I think it's Georgia. I think Georgia has shown, even in the second half against Alabama, just how dangerous it is, and has followed up with the win at Texas, which was dominant, terrific defensive scheme, I thought, for that game. Now, again, I say that, and their quarterback's throwing interceptions every 4th or 5th play. So, you can make a case that it's Ohio State, maybe even make a case that it's Texas, although it's harder after the Georgia game. Ohio State obviously coming off of its best win of the season at Penn State, and has really seemed to find something on the defensive side that it lacked in that Oregon loss. And I think it's easy to criticize Ohio State. We all thought this team would be kind of like Indiana has been, where every game is lopsided. But it hasn't been that way. They've had issues on the offensive line. Your quarterback play has been good, maybe not elite at times. The defensive backfield, I thought, got exposed a little bit in the Oregon game. But meanwhile, they're sitting here with a 1-point road loss to the number 1 team in the country. I'd be very surprised, guys, and curious if you feel differently, if Oregon isn't ranked number 1 by the committee. So that's their only loss. So you could certainly make a case it's Ohio State over Georgia as well.
I would agree there. I think Oregon right now has maybe not separated themselves, but is clearly the top team in the country based on everything we've seen, both resume and on the field. And resume versus on the field is going to be interesting, Adam, for Penn State, coming off the loss this weekend where everything had sort of been building with their schedule to go for this matchup with Ohio State, and they lose at home, albeit in a close, low-scoring game here. How far do you think the committee potentially, I'd say, drops? They don't have a relative starting point with the College Football Playoff Committee, but relative to their 6th place ranking in the AP poll right now.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one, Mike. I mean, do they fall to 10? Do they fall to 8? Do they fall closer to that 12 line? When then you start to get a little bit nervous because their remaining schedule doesn't include a team that I believe will be ranked in the committee's top 25. So, what are you leaning on if you're Penn State? The home win against Illinois, that's a solid win. They do have 3, notable-ish road wins. They started off at West Virginia, beat them definitively. They rallied to beat USC. They rallied to beat Wisconsin without their starting quarterback. The committee, if they're doing their job correctly, and I have no reason to think they aren't, they're considering all of these factors in evaluating a Penn State team. But more than likely, you're looking at a 11-1 Penn State team without a win that truly pops, like Georgia beating Alabama beating Georgia, or Georgia beating Texas, or Ohio State beating Penn State, or Oregon beating Ohio State. Penn State's not going to have any of that on its resume. And so I do wonder, the old style points conversation, does that come into play here for Penn State down the stretch if they end up with an 11-1 profile that lacks a true signature win?
So we're going to end up with teams that are eventually in the first top 12 in this ranking down the road that are going to have 2 losses because teams play one another. How many 2-loss teams do you think can make the final 12?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be that many in the end, just because of some of the matchups that are still upcoming. But you mentioned the Alabama LSU winner. That team, should be in the playoff mix for the rest of the way if they don't stumble. So that's a huge game. I think Ole Miss, if they can beat Georgia at home and show that, hey, listen, we had some issues early. I mean, I was at the LSU game, guys, and it's rare that you say this, but you look at Ole Miss warming up and you look at LSU warming up, and I cross-referenced this with some people I know on the LSU staff. Ole Miss is more talented than LSU. So if you're going specifically just by talent, I mean, they built their own super team of sorts, much like Ohio State did in terms of retention plus adding guys from the portal. If they can go out and beat Georgia and win out, I think they have a really good opportunity to get in as a two-loss team. I don't know if anybody out in the Big Ten can do that. I guess the only possibility would be if Ohio State were to beat Indiana but lose to another team. And again, a loss to Purdue or Northwestern or maybe even Michigan. I don't know if that would be enough for the Buckeyes, but they would at least have the wins over Penn State and Indiana. I don't see any two-loss contenders outside of the SEC or Big Ten. I know you guys are really interested in Notre Dame, I'm sure, and they're going to be another fascinating team to evaluate tonight because, again, to their credit, they've taken care of business mostly in dominating fashion since that loss to Northern Illinois, but that loss just keeps getting worse and worse. Northern Illinois hasn't gone on and really validated that loss as much as Notre Dame would like, and certainly with the Texas A&M loss or win, them losing last week, that might hurt Notre Dame's profile. A&M's another one. A&M only has one loss in the SEC. They have Texas at the end of the season. If they can win out, they would be a really interesting team for the committee to evaluate.
Back to Ohio State. If Indiana beats Ohio State's going to be ranked third up until they play Indiana or in that area. If they lose to Indiana, they have 2 losses, but I would find it hard to believe they would drop out of the top 12. Their 2 losses would be a 1-point loss to a top-ranked Oregon, and then if it's a close game loss to Indiana, to a highly ranked Indiana team. I would think that they would play the rest of their games and sit out the Big Ten championship game, that they would be in the top 12.
Well, Mike, how wonderful is it that we're sitting here on November 5th talking about Ohio State losing to Indiana and them not dropping out of the CFP? I mean, can we just say that to start off with how great that is? And it's true. And I think a lot of what you said will be dependent on how the committee values Indiana and their profile and losing to them, more so than they'll obviously get credit for any team that wins at Ohio Stadium should get tremendous amount of credit. But how much will Ohio State be penalized for losing to, most likely a 10-0 or at worst a 9-1 Indiana team at home? Maybe that wouldn't knock them out. It's an interesting scenario, and it's certainly possible given what we've seen from Indiana so far this season.
Adam, as we look and you talk about some of the conversations that are new that we get to have, let's look at that 12 range towards the back end of this. More likely in your mind in this first round of rankings tonight that we see inside the top 12, 1-loss Boise State representing the group of 5, or 1-loss SMU holding on as the last remaining unbeaten in the ACC this season?
Yeah, I think SMU, especially with the win over Pitt, the dominant win they had last week, and how incredible they've been really since the start of the season, I think they have a good chance to be ranked in that top 12. It's interesting to see how the committee will evaluate Boise State's win. I mean, in many ways, the best thing on Boise State's resume is that 3-point loss to Oregon, where they really pushed Oregon to the brink early in the year. The Mountain West, you got UNLV there, who's been a really solid team, but the Mountain West overall, drops off quite substantially after, I think, Colorado State. So how are they going to look at Boise State's overall profile in relation to SMU, which, again, we know SMU was sorting through its quarterback situation early this year. They lost to BYU when they were still in that uncertainty phase. They settle on Kevin Jennings, and they've been really, really good since. But hey, they're a week removed from a game that Rhett Lashley, their coach, told me and others they should have lost to Duke, and but they found a way, and they obviously built on that with a great performance last week against Pitt.
Bigger surprise, Indiana or BYU?
Yeah, Mike, it's Indiana. I mean, again, Indiana, if you study the history of that program, independent of Kirk Cignetti, we all Googled him. We know he's good. But, I covered the Big Ten for a long time, guys. I mean, they haven't even shared a Big Ten title since 1967. And the program had gone downhill the last few years. They'd lost a lot of really good players, because of the NIL situation. They were in a pretty good place in 2020, and it just kind of fell off a cliff the last few years. And so, for them to not just be bowl eligible and not just be, breaking all these records, but realistically having a chance for the college football playoff is incredible. And nothing against BYU. I talked with Kalani Sitake yesterday about his team and what they've been able to do. And I really, really impressed, especially on the defensive side, how much better they are. And Jake Retzlaff, the quarterback, obviously getting a lot of attention for what he's done. And Kalani just loves his team. He just absolutely loves what they've been able to do to this point in the season. But Indiana, it just isn't a team that you ever expect to be talking about for postseason, for the Big Ten championship, and all these incredible goals that are very realistic at this point for Coach Sig and his team.
9 Indiana used to be such a rallying cry and now has become the floor for this stellar season in Bloomington. It really is something else here. Adam, we appreciate all the time and insight, man. We're looking forward to tonight. Enjoy it yourself, and hopefully we'll talk to you again soon. All right, man?
You bet, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Adam.
Dad, it's so true. This Indiana, I remember the 9 Indiana team from the pandemic era version of college football, where you had great players back then. You had, everything that with Michael Penix Jr. and Kalen DeBoer there, and all of these exciting games that they are winning. This is a totally different animal because, to his point, while their strength of schedule is near the bottom of college football, I think they're 107th in strength of schedule this year. They have been dominant, an average margin of victory of 33 points per game. And so this team with Curtis Rourke as a quarterback, who legitimate difference maker, a defense that's gotten after people, a great group of wide receivers, there's a legitimate opportunity for them to beat Ohio State. I don't think people have fully started to entertain that because we were so focused on Penn State, and rightly so. But the more and more I watch Indiana, I'm like, oh no, they can do this. This isn't fluky with them.
Yeah, and again, I'm glad they play Ohio State, because if they just played some also-rans in the Big Ten to finish it out, people would still be wondering, yeah, okay, they're undefeated, but they get to play Ohio State. So, and on the road, it's at Ohio State, so that will be a monster test. They come out of that test on top. I mean, I get saying Indiana's a bigger surprise than BYU because we see BYU be good over the years. This is just so odd to see Indiana not only playing well but undefeated and playing well. So let's see if they can continue.
Yeah, they're one of the many interesting teams, and this is why the first ranking is so important, because, again, for anyone unfamiliar, the committee doesn't take into account the AP rankings, or at least they're not supposed to in the way they judge and legislate this. This is supposed to be every week a fresh look and a fresh reorganization as they do their rankings from here on out. And so I will be fascinated. How high is Indiana tonight? How do they juggle Ohio State and Georgia at the 2 spot behind what should be Oregon? And then for me after that, where are Penn State and Alabama, and where is Notre Dame, are, I think, the biggest questions that are going to inform a lot of, A, what the committee values in this season, but B, also set the table for a lot of the matchups that are going to decide the outcomes in the sport down the rest of this season.
And you could have more 2-loss teams. Tennessee still plays Georgia. They could get a second loss. Texas still plays Texas A&M. Texas could get a second loss. So you could be dealing with definitely with some 2-loss teams in the top 12.
Yeah, I know we've had these conversations about so many conferences where the big teams won't play each other and you'll have all these undefeated seasons. Me and Jason Fitz were talking about this yesterday. College football always tends to work itself out. This is a dumb, chaos-driven sport, and I don't think this year is going to be any exception. Coming up next, though, we'll get some chaos in the NFL as some moves being made ahead of the deadline for one contender next.
Welcome back to GoJo and Golic. Jesse Cofield, Mike Golic Jr. and Mike Golic Sr. And wow, what a treat for us. We have some breaking news that actually occurred during the show. So, guys, the rich get richer as Detroit has made a trade for a pass rusher here. Lions are acquiring Pro Bowl defensive end Za'Darius Smith from the Browns. Fellas, this is a great move. We'd heard the rumors that this was coming, but great move by the Lions, filling that void left by that Aiden Hutchinson injury.
Yeah, Dad, they had to do something at this position. I know we had all gone pie in the sky for so long, wondering if, Max Crosby or any of these other premier pass rushers would be on the chopping block. And understandably, after a while, when everyone cools down, you realize moving franchise cornerstones before the deadline because you have one bad season, probably not always the best route to go. And so this does feel like a happy medium for a defense that had sort of morphed its style to be more of a blitzing group in the absence of Aiden Hutchinson. They now get a little bit of a lift here, Dad. Do you like this move?
Yeah, I mean, a 10th-year player, had 5.5 sacks last year for Cleveland, already has 5 this year. The year before, 2022, his 1 year in Minnesota, had 10 sacks. 19 and 20 in Green Bay, had 13.5, 12.5. So it's certainly a move Detroit needed to make. He's a guy who has one more year left on his deal for, I think, a couple mil next year, like a $9 million cap hit. But obviously they need him for this year. So yeah, you knew they were going to make a move, and like you said, we mentioned those big time targets out of the gate, but I don't ever really think those were actually talked about. So you get a guy that has proven he can put pressure on the quarterback for a team that is looking to make a run. So I think a quality move for Detroit.
Yep, he was not only second on the Browns in sacks, 5 behind Myles Garrett, 7, but also second in total pressures, 26 behind Myles Garrett's 48, according to Next Gen Stats. And listen, obviously, life's going to change a lot when you're rushing without Myles Garrett as the guy opposite you, right, and all of the other things that Browns defense has. But still a talented rusher on his own, a guy we talked to last year, still feels like he's got a lot left in the tank. And so it's one of those other things. It's like we talked about with the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, they made a move out of desperation at wide receiver because injury had hurt them at that position, and it paid off already for them. It seems like Detroit, who right now, Dad, when you look at what this Lions team has done this weekend, I think for a lot of people, going on the road, seeing Jared Goff, especially at quarterback, and this team that does play on an indoor track, but plays decidedly football environment agnostic football, going on the road and getting a win at a sloppy Green Bay track the way that they did, I think solidified for many, if anyone was still on the fence, that that's the best team in football right now.
Yeah, it is, and fortunately enough, that's a game I'll be calling, Detroit at Houston on Sunday night. So we'll see Za'Darius in a different uniform rushing the passer. But yes, they are the best team in football. I know Kansas City is undefeated, but like I said, you have to give them credit for being obviously right near the top. But I would take Detroit over them right now, even though Pat Mahomes, by the way, we didn't even talk about Pat Mahomes tweaking his ankle. Man, for a while, for a minute, that looked bad. When he was being helped off the field, barely putting any pressure on it. By the time he got to the sideline, he was walking on it, and a minute later, he was jogging on it. So you're like, okay, all right, so he's fine.
Yeah, it was a lot of scary shots for Chief fans of Carson Wentz warming up, who a lot of people, I'm sure, just remembered in that moment. Oh, wow, Carson Wentz is on the Chiefs, and now he was potentially about to go into that game. But, yeah, you're right. No, that was one to keep an eye on, by the way, with them. Patrick Mahomes tweaked that ankle in the win against the Las Vegas Raiders the week before, and now coming up on a short week, it's going to be interesting to see how they manage and protect that for a guy who, the play he injured it on, the perfect example of Mahomes does things off script and out of whack from normal people. He's pulling up to do one of those little dump offs on a touchdown that they score and ends up tweaking that ankle. So certainly a big move there, but again, big move for the Detroit Lions, who, like a lot of their other counterparts, you look at the Kansas City Chiefs making the move that they did, the Bills going out and bringing in Amari Cooper, the Ravens going out and trying to sign Deontay Johnson. The Ravens, Dad, the only one you could really argue didn't do it at necessarily a position of need, because Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman had been so productive, because the tight end room's such a big part of that receiving. That was more bolstering a position where you can always use more bodies. But for Buffalo, for Kansas City, and now certainly Detroit in the moves they made, these are all contenders who had clear needs, who went out and addressed it, understanding that, hey, we've got a chance to go out and win the ultimate prize this year against a Kansas City team that's going to let everyone keep it close and give you shots to win the game.
Yeah, they really are. They make it interesting. But you're right. I mean, listen, that's what good teams do, right? They see a position of need that comes about because of injury, and they go do something. They don't sit on their hands. That's why they're championship caliber teams.
So again, the Detroit Lions picking up Za'Darius Smith. Detroit sending a 2025 fifth-round pick, a 2026 sixth-round pick to the Browns in exchange for Smith and a 2026 seventh-rounder. The Lions will take on the remaining $605,000 of his contract. The Browns have already paid $11.3 million of his 2024 compensation this season. Jesse, let's get to the other news. We mentioned we're lucky this actually broke during the show, because yesterday we were all sitting around in our post-show meeting after looking at the news about Dennis Allen and the Saints.
Yeah, oh, come on, man. Of course it happened right after the show for you guys. So Derek Carr and Michael Thomas no longer the headline, like you mentioned. So Saints fired head coach Dennis Allen. This one kind of felt inevitable, right, guys? 7 straight losses here. It kind of felt like he was on the hot seat.
Yeah, we had talked about this during the body of the show yesterday, Dad, of the if Dennis Allen actually finished the season with the Saints, based on how poorly this had gone. And really, on both sides of the ball, it had been an abject disaster. The offense had scored 11 touchdowns in the first 2 weeks of the season and had scored 11 since then. The defense was 28th in the NFL in points per game, and that was the side of the ball that Dennis Allen came from, the side of the ball we expected to hold serve throughout all these changes. But unfortunately, as we mentioned before, now the second time he has been relieved of his duties as the head coach of a Derek Carr-led football team. And Dad, it seems like the Saints team's at a bit of a crossroad. They've always sort of pushed off that real reset all the way through the end of the Sean Payton era. They might be due finally for a hard look in the mirror at how they want to organize their franchise going into the future.
Yeah, I think they obviously are going to have to do that. You mentioned it was with the Raiders in 14. I believe it was 14 that he was fired, that Derek Carr was the quarterback of. And so Darren Rizzi takes over. He's a special teams coordinator. It's the second head coach we've had fired during the season. Both, by the way, are firsts by the owners of a midseason firing. Woody Johnson with the Jets firing Robert Saleh, and Tom Benson, since he bought the team in 1985. This is the first in-season firing that they have had as well. And, you know, I think the Jets was and again, I'm not in New Orleans. When you fire a coach this early, it seems like you're looking for a spark, or there was just not great communication, or there was headbutting. I don't know, because we'll see more coaches let go in a few weeks before the season ends. And one of the reasons you do that is so you can get a jump on your next coach. You can be in the pipeline for your next coach. You can't be openly looking for a new coach when you have a coach. And an interim coach doesn't count. If you have an interim coach, you can still be searching for a head coach. Now, you're not legally supposed to be searching for a head coach who has a job, but we know that there are backdoor conversations that is done, but at least they can openly be looking for a head coach. And unfortunately, it's not going to be the last coach that's fired in the next, 7-8 weeks. But I agree. I mean, starting out 2 wins and losing 7 in a row, what are the changes made? Alvin Kamara is going to be 30. He hits that magic number that Derrick Henry has blown right through. Saquon Barkley's up there as well and running well. So who do you, the question for New Orleans is, who do you hang on to build around, right? I mean, do you start to cast off the older, expensive pieces and just start to build anew?
Yeah, and the real question with that's going to be around the quarterback and Derek Carr, who is right now in the second year of his 4-year contract extension. It was 4 years, $150 million. with $60 million guaranteed at signing and $100 million total guaranteed. His dead cap hit after this year would be around $60 million. But, Dad, next year is when his cap hit would really jump in this contract. A lot of the money was backloaded. So if he's on the roster, the cap hit is $51 million as it sits right now. And so you'd probably have to do some smoothing there if you were going to keep him.
Yep.
And I just don't know how. If you're going to find, and this is where I think, again, the Saints are probably due for a hard reset. They spent so long trying to stay competitive through the Sean Payton years, and then they bring DA on for the continuity and try and keep it going after that. And now you've finally gotten to a point where you've paid off one credit card for another for so long, you probably have to go and take a look at your finances. And I think it would probably behoove them to start to think about doing it with a fresh start at quarterback, because Derek Carr is a capable veteran in some ways, but I don't know if he's the guy that you want to start this next leg of the franchise necessarily with, if you are going to clean house the way it appears they're going to.
Yeah, and with only 2 wins on the season, they could be picking high in what people are calling not a great quarterback class, or maybe just 1 or 2, that more than 1 or 2 teams are going to be vying for quarterbacks. So a lot of it is going to be on how these quarterbacks are rated and what the thought process is of them coming out. But money could deter New Orleans from moving on from Derek Carr. So we'll have to wait and see.
It could, but again, at 2-7, they're right neck and neck with the Las Vegas Raiders, the New England Patriots, and a bunch of others who are sitting down there with only 2 wins right now. Speaking of the Raiders, Jesse, another team that made some coaching decisions that is another interesting one to keep an eye out, quite frankly, with their head coach, too, and Antonio Pierce.
Yes, some coaching decisions, absolutely clearing house on the offensive side of the ball, saying goodbye to offensive coordinator, offensive line coach, quarterbacks coach. What do you make of the move, and what do you guys think about Antonio Pierce coming out and saying this was 100% his decision? Is it kind of like, let me fire some people before they try to fire me?
Yeah, Dad, feels like desperation on his part there, because to Jesse's point, I don't know what you expected from an offense led by Aiden O'Connell or Gardner Minshew to go out and necessarily perform at an incredibly high level, and that's before you have the high leverage trade of your star wide receiver in Devontae Adams, who was dealing with the hamstring injury with you guys not really playing much there. Like, this wasn't an offense with much of an identity going into this season, and now after you'd had all the mishaps at quarterback, I don't know how you expected much more out of this group. So this seems like a guy who's starting to finally try and take some care of his own job.
Players were really happy when Antonio Pierce was the interim coach and kept the job, but you wonder if the bloom's off the rose there, right? It was his decision to get rid of the offense. And by the way, what a difference. I mentioned Woody Johnson and Tom Benson, first time they made midseason coaching changes. For the Raiders, this is the 4th time in the last 5 seasons they've switched coordinators or head coaches in the middle of the season. They do it like you're eating chips. And that's horrible for continuity, obviously. So Antonio Pierce making offensive changes, but, like we saw with the Jets, is it really making a difference on offense with the personnel that you have? Is it really, and the Jets or the Raiders have less skilled personnel than the Jets do on offense. So do we all of a sudden see a marked improvement from this offense? I don't think so. And you wonder if Antonio Pierce is on the hot seat as well.
That's the thing. Like, I can only look at this and say, is he feeling pressure around that building for his own job? Because you line up on paper what they were walking into this season offensively with, and it was more of a hope and a prayer. And especially once you made the decision to trade Devontae, I mean, your best offensive skill player is a rookie in Brock Bowers at tight end. Besides that, you let Josh Jacobs go this offseason. You decided and weren't able to get one of the quarterbacks in the draft because you picked too late. And so you rolled into this year with Aiden O'Connell, who's a 4th or 5th round pick, and Gardner Minshew, who's the premier journeyman of the NFL, who's sort of the line of demarcation between starter and backup. I don't know how Luke Getsy was supposed to have a ton of success with that group based on what you loaded up with to start this season. So it's one of those things where, hey, I think you've got an idea of how bad you might be going into a year, but once you're all of a sudden faced with that reality, it starts to feel a lot different.
Yeah, but they're going to be a high-picking team, another team that's going to be in need of a quarterback. There's going to be more teams in need of quarterback than really first-round quarterbacks that may be available, but that's why it's the most overreached position in the draft.
And listen, having one of those quarterbacks doesn't necessarily absolve you from this conversation either. Shane Waldron's another one whose job's going to get talked about a lot as the offensive coordinator for the reigning #1 overall pick in Caleb Williams, as that team and that offense not necessarily having the rubber meet the road in the way everybody expected early on. Plenty more time to get to that, but coming up next, we got plenty to get to with our buddy Charlotte Wilder, who's going to join us for the second hour of the show here on GoJo and Golic.
Welcome back to GoJo and Golic. The basketball season in college tipped off last night in a big way. We saw our first court storming as unranked UCF upset number 13 Texas A&M 64-61. UCF took a jab at the SEC on social media, posting the slogan, "It just means more," after their victory. Elsewhere in the ranks of college basketball, we saw a top 10 matchup to kick off the season. However, the game wasn't particularly close. Number 8 Baylor visited number 6 Gonzaga, and the Zags won in comfortable fashion, eclipsing the century mark, winning the game 101-63. Probably not something the schedulers had on their mind this early in the season. Coming up next in hour 2, Charlotte Wilder going to join the program. It is a Wilder Wednesday on a Tuesday.
All right, hour number 2 here on GoJo and Golic. We'll get you updated on an injury to Dak Prescott that can affect the Cowboys season, likely for the next few weeks, coming off yet another brutal loss for that team in a season to forget. But in the meantime, we've got a ton of NBA action to catch back up on, and to help us out with that, our buddy Charlotte Wilder, back where she belongs, the Wilder Wednesday on a Tuesday here on GoJo and Golic. You can catch her co-hosting Oddball with Amin El Hassan every day but Friday during the football season here. Char, how we doing? Oh, we can't hear Charlotte right now for some reason. I don't know if it's the powers that be trying to silence her voice on Election Day here, which is just sad and despicable.
Yeah, how about it?
This opportunity to have her voice heard, because everyone's voice should be heard, because this is democracy here. We'll try and fix that as best we can here right now, because I want to talk about, we finally saw Paul George make his debut. So much consternation in Sixers land last night, Dad, for what's been the start of the season storyline, him and Joel Embiid not on the court. And we finally get Paul George out there, and it looked like a guy who had not played yet this season after dealing with a lower body injury, who's a little bit of an older player here. 7 of the team's 14 turnovers, a real struggle to start the game that eventually got going, but ultimately this is kind of what I expected for someone in his position trying to come into a lineup he hasn't been a part of yet.
Yeah, 4 of 14, 1 of 7 from three-point land. It's still Tyrese Maxey leading this team, 12 of 22. He has 32 points. Durant, though, had 35. As the Suns beat them 118-116. But I'm with you. You know, you're older and you're coming off injury. There's going to be a little bit of rust to kick off. They're still waiting for Joel Embiid to get back. So what was set to be this team to make a run has been, I mean, you can't have a worse start, right? I mean, they're sitting there 1-5. Paul George finally gets his first game in. Embiid still isn't playing. So it's just a mess in Philadelphia right now for one of the teams you thought maybe would contend.
And it's one of those things, even watching last night, where you saw after a rough first quarter, Paul George started to find his way a little bit more, hit some shots. You mentioned it wasn't an abject disaster. 15-5-4 is a pretty defensible night for a player making his debut early in the season. But it's just one of those things that it makes it hard to get excited about this, knowing, hey, we're watching him get acclimated right now to an offense led by Tyrese Maxey. And we know that's not going to be the case for this team. We hope when they get to full strength, because Joel Embiid is supposed to be the one out there at the core of what's going on here, as I believe we have now gotten the voice back for Charlotte Wilder here so she can weigh in on this. Charlotte, what did you make of Paul George's debut last night that we had all been looking forward to?
I mean, I think it's what he said himself. He was rusty. Also, he's 34. And so I don't know. It's very, I think this is one of those things where we can't take anything really away from it in terms of what it's going to mean for the Sixers going forward. He didn't hit a lot of his shots. He kind of got going with rebounds and assists, but I think that coming off of that left knee, was it left knee? I think that's right. He said himself that he was just glad that the mental part of it wasn't a block for him. And, that's a nice thing to say. So hopefully that's true. I think that as he gets back into the rotation and into the rhythm of it, I mean, this is also his first game of the season. Like, it's not just like his first game back from injury. Like, he hadn't played except for preseason where he managed to do this to his knee. So I think all of the questions that I had about the Sixers still stand. Namely why this was the decision that the front office made, given that we all knew this was going to happen. But in terms of Paul George, I mean, I think that it was kind of fine, because we're not going to know anything until a few games in after this injury and until he and Embiid play together.
Charlotte, what's your confidence level that Paul George can fit in with the chemistry of Embiid and Maxey, and those two stay healthy and actually make a run at the Eastern Conference?
Oh, God. I don't want the city of Philadelphia to be mad at me, especially in the state of Pennsylvania on a day where I know they've already got a lot going on. So look, to me, it comes down to timing, right? I think it's a situation where if they can be healthy at the same time towards the end of the season, if they can go on a run, starting after the All-Star break and things are looking good, then I think I could be much more confident than I am right now. I think right now it's like that feels so far away, and it feels like there are so many hurdles to get over before we even start to get close to talking about whether any of that matters. I think chemistry wise, I mean, they haven't done it yet. This is like the most boring sports talk of all time, because I'm basically saying, I don't know, but like what we've seen doesn't make me feel great. But I don't think that means it can't happen, Gojo.
Yeah, I think that's the difficult part about the NBA season, and this is true for NHL, MLB, is the seasons are so long, it's hard to assign too much meaning to any one part of the year, especially at the beginning, where right now the vibes are definitively bad around Philadelphia, right? You've had a frustrated Nick Nurse talking about his injured superstars. You had everything that went on with Joel Embiid and the locker room situation with the reporter Marcus Hayes in recent days, with the references to his brother and son, which, Charlotte, I know we didn't get a chance to talk about this. We discussed that at length yesterday, but especially for someone who has been a writer and has had the difficult task of, we come on here and talk about guys every day, but I do think the written form is even a little bit deeper level, being in the locker rooms and covering teams the way these people do. Just how far is that a massive overstep of the boundaries that usually exist between the people writing and the people they cover?
Oh yeah. I mean, I was shocked when I saw what he had actually written. And to Marcus's Hayes credit, or to his editor's credit, they did change that line. They took the line out where he said, it was when, I'm paraphrasing, Embiid said that he was playing for his son and his late brother, Arthur, who have the same name. His son was named after Arthur. Arthur was killed in a car crash when Embiid was getting rehabbed for an injury. And I think that has felt like a big part of the sacrifice Embiid feels he has made, which was he didn't get to see his brother for last time because he was doing something for basketball, for essentially, you could say, the city of Philadelphia. And so for Hayes to say, you were doing this for those guys, you say you're doing it for those people, but you haven't shown up to work. It's like, I think to me, it is the fundamental misunderstanding of what this job is, which is that, sure, I think sports can be very powerful ways to talk about very powerful things, to talk about family stories, personal motivation, societal issues, societal problems, the way we're all coming together. It can be all of those things, but when you're writing a column about basketball and you bring in something that is literally life or death as it correlates to the way someone is or isn't playing a sport, it's like, that's ridiculous. And I think, to me, I have always tried to approach this world with the lightheartedness that it deserves when you are talking about the sport itself, because it's supposed to be, that isn't the place. It just had, first of all, it had nothing to do with how he's playing. And secondly, I think it does really disrespect the memory and what these people mean to him, to bring those in and say you're not doing it for them. It was wild. And of course you can't shove anybody. You can't do that. I do think, though, that, Hayes wrote that. I mean, I don't know. I haven't talked to him. I can't assign motivation. To me, when you write something like that, it is because you are expecting and hoping for a reaction. And I think, for me, my time as a writer and reporter actually really informed the way that I talk about all of this when I'm not in those rooms, because it is it just constantly reminds you people are listening, people can hear you, and you can be critical and you can be funny and you can be cynical, but for the most part, like, if this isn't something you would say to somebody's face, or at least couch in maybe like slightly more gently than we say on air, then what are you doing? And that, to me, is sort of tried to be the golden rule, but I don't know. Clearly I'm passionate about this, Senior.
No, it did. Listen, you're right. It did seem out of place, and it did seem like he was looking for a reaction, and he got a reaction. And we can sit there and say that Jason Kelsey shouldn't have reacted the way he did, or Joel Embiid shouldn't have reacted the way they did. But I'm not going to say that, because I probably would have reacted the same way, and I think most people probably would have reacted the same way. So back now to basketball. Which team do you think will have more trouble finding their tread for this year, the 76ers or the Milwaukee Bucks, who are just a mess right now?
I knew you were going to throw that at me. As soon as you said which team, I was like, oh, God. Okay, so here's the thing. It should be the Sixers, right? They have injuries. They haven't played together. It's a new team. The Bucks should be doing pretty great. They had a new coach come in last season. They had all off season to work together, Giannis and Dame. Let's get this thing going. Currently, last night, Giannis was out, and they lost to the Cavs, which would sound worse if it were last season. Even not really. The Cavs are undefeated. The Cavs are sick this year.
Team.
I'm like, yeah, there you go. But I am concerned by what I'm seeing coming out of Milwaukee because they're both healthy. Gojo. I think that if this were, Giannis was out, but like there hasn't been this major thing. I would really love a deep dive in there. Speaking of being in locker rooms, if someone on the ground in Milwaukee can like really just give us the full, complete juice as to what's happening, that would be great, because it just seems like a lack of chemistry and an inability to get it together to mesh that is pretty surprising to me, Gojo.
Yeah, I agreed, Charlotte. That was one of the teams that you looked at and said, on paper, all right, everyone's been here a while now. We have got, I think, a deeper appreciation in modern basketball for just how hard it is to microwave chemistry, even with superstar players. We've watched some of the best attempts at these big threes coming together die on the vine in year one, because it's still a sport that's so interconnected. And when you run up against continuity of teams with great talent, like the Denver Nuggets team that won a title, and like others have since, you can sometimes fall short. But hey, a year under their belts and all these chances to work together, and yet it still seems like a team coached by a guy in Doc Rivers who wouldn't wish this on his worst enemy, and a guy in Dame Lillard who's dreaming about the Miami Heat team that now people are talking about linked to Giannis, who's all of a sudden a name that people are comfortable flirting with the idea of him winding up somewhere else over the course of this year, even though I know your New York Knicks are also someone mentioned in this as well, Charlotte.
Okay, first of all, so I do want to say that in my household, first of all, I'm a Celtics fan. Thank you, Mike. In my household, there was a little bit of excitement when that report came out. I don't know where that's being leaked from, or if this is just other GMs trying to sow chaos, which was like, maybe we got Cat this whole time to be able to flip him for Giannis. I will say, I think the cruelest thing in this situation, given how much Dame wanted to go to Miami and how the Blazers wouldn't deal him to Miami because they were mad at Miami, which is like, oh my God, can we be serious for 2 seconds? Like, is this middle school? And yeah, it is. It's the NBA. But I think the cruelest thing that could happen would be Giannis going to Miami. Like, I cannot. You stick Dame in Milwaukee from Portland, where he played his whole career. It doesn't work. And then you send the other superstar to the place he wanted to go. Like, I don't know. There should be like league rules against that.
It does seem particularly cruel, Charlotte. And you're right. I think men are too emotional to lead. I think that's what this ultimately comes back to with a lot of the things that you've underscored here, is they just do not have the capacity to go out and lead in any rational sense. But I don't know. That's going to be interesting to monitor, Dad, because so far this NBA season, it feels like the story has been the Cleveland Cavaliers are really good, and everybody else is getting hurt right now, whether it's the Sixers to start the season, Steph Curry to start the season, Anthony Davis just goes down with the Lakers, who are on a dreadful road trip at this point after their 3-0 start. So I know early in the NBA season, it's always tough to try and pull stuff out because you're fighting with the attention of football. It is a sport with a long season, so we're only going to assign so much. But it does seem like outside of your Cavaliers, Dad, going and balling out on everybody, it's been everybody else trying to keep their superstars on the court in one piece.
I think two of the biggest, or right now it's the Cavaliers and Oklahoma City playing in the finals because they're sitting there both undefeated. But the Cavs, well, as Charlotte said, have been playing better last year, but they're still undefeated this year. To me, and we can get more into it if you want, but a big surprise, Mike, you and I both thought Golden State would be down this year. And I know it's early, but they're 6-1 and looking pretty good at this point.
6-1 with Steph Curry coming back off an ankle injury, and their best probably still ahead of them. It's been interesting to watch what has been old now looking new this season. Coming up next, we'll get to a new look at our college football playoff committee rankings next on GoJo and Golic.
Welcome back to GoJo and Golic. Jesse Cofield, Mike Golic Jr., Mike Golic Sr., and Charlotte Wilder are here with you to talk about a big day in America. Okay, it's really important. The first college football playoff rankings are being released tonight. That's not what you thought I was talking about, but it is. Okay, Gojo and Senior, you gave your predictions for this one, but before we get into that, we got to talk about this whole rankings versus seedings thing. Everyone's confused. I'm confused. I don't understand it. Can somebody lay this out to me, explain this to me like I'm 5 years old?
Yeah, I realize now that going into this, there's been a lot of change in college football this year, and we've talked about the 12-team playoff and the way that's going to be organized at the end of the season, where you're going to have the 5 highest-ranked group conference champions that'll be awarded automatic bids into the college playoff. So presumably the Power 4 conference champions, the SEC, the Big 10, the ACC, and the Big 12, and then one of the Group of 5 champions right now, Boise State, the highest-ranked Group of 5 team in line to wear their conference champion. They would all get automatic bids, and the top 4 ranked among those would get first-round buys, followed by the at-large bids that would make it. So the rest of the teams that are voted in based off being ranked inside the top 12. When it comes to these rankings that are coming out right now, the committee is just going to rank these teams in the order that they believe they exist in right now in terms of how good they are. This is just going to be the ranking that supplants the AP poll that we have right now, or the coaches poll that people reference. This is the only one that matters because the people in this room, the 13 committee members, are the ones that are going to decide the sport. So they're going to go through, and I've been through this mock committee process, guys. They rank them in pods of 3 usually, especially to start, where they're going to decide, all right, who are the top 3 teams. Then after that, once we've got that organized, who are teams 4 through 6, and on down the list they're going to work. Now, they used to do that, and that's why you'd get that top 6 graphic on ESPN all the time. Now, obviously, we're going to expand that to 12, but they're just going to rank these teams based on how good they think they all are right now, and then come the end of the season, those rankings will inform the seeding that's going to be a little bit different. So I hope that helps explain some of that. Dad, Charlotte, I know we were having questions about that before, but this is purely just a ranking of quality right now, no bearing in mind of seeding at this point in the first go at it.
I think that the best way to is what you said. It just replaces the AP ranking. So it's still ranking. The only time it'll change is after the last ranking, the next time when they seed, after we have conference champions and we know who will go 1 through 4. So over the next amount of weeks until the championship games, just look at it as ranking, because Mike and I both have like Oregon and Ohio State in our top 5, right? And that, or in our top 4, that won't happen in the final seedings because they're both in the Big Ten. Only one will be there, but that's down the road. So, Charlotte, these are just rankings. These just replace the AP rankings.
Right. I just cannot wait. I cannot wait for the time between the last ranking of the season and then the seeding, when the seeding comes out and fans lose their ever-loving minds because the ranking, because it has to be different from the seeding. They're like, but my team was second or my team was third, but it's the same. Like, that is going to be some of the most beautiful content and beautiful reaction. Okay, you know what? I was a little skeptical of the system. Now I love it, because like, this is what college football is built on, is just vehemently disagreeing with the powers that be. So I'm with it.
And only partially understanding what you're disagreeing with is the bedrock that this sport is built on. And Charlotte, I'm not actually worried about 1 through 4. I think the teams up there that are going to be dealing in that tax bracket are going to be very aware of this. What's going to be interesting to watch, and why, among the many things that we could talk about being interested in and seeing what the committee values tonight, right now in the AP poll for the college football top 25, you've got Boise State checking in at 12 right now. So they'd be ranked inside the top 12, but let's say SMU's up there right now and they're in the top 12. Well, if we were to end the season today after this ranking and SMU was sitting there at 12 and Boise State was sitting there at number 13, SMU would get bumped from the playoffs unless they had won the ACC. But if we're assuming this is after the conference title shakes out, they would be bumped. Someone in that 12 spot, someone who's ranked 12th in the country at the end of the year, if you have the highest ranked Group of 5 champion ranked outside of that, is going to get knocked out, and that's the person who's in for a very rude awakening around their Christmas.
Totally. And this is one of those things where like the whole system feels like it was changed to do away with some of that belly aching, because I think with 4 teams, there were a lot of schools and a lot of teams who constantly felt like we were amazing. You know, you didn't give us a bid, blah, blah, blah. But in college football, there is never a team that is not mad. And so I'm just glad that we have figured out what that will be and how to preserve that tradition.
I think one thing that we could agree on, Mike and Charlotte, is that Notre Dame is in an elimination as far as looking at the rest of the regular season. If Notre Dame loses another one, they're done. They're going to be out, right? They're going to have 2 losses, and they're going to be out. While I do think a couple of 2-loss teams will be in it, I don't think Notre Dame and 2 losses, with one being to Northern Illinois, would be in it. And the other is Alabama and LSU is an elimination game this week, right? They both have 2 losses. 3 losses ain't getting in, and it's not even a guarantee that that either one of them with 2 losses would get in, but they have obviously a lot better chance of getting in with 2 losses than 3 losses. So Alabama LSU is an elimination game.
Yeah, for all the people that wanted to complain about how, this expanded playoff robs college football's regular season of meaning, you're going to have Alabama versus LSU at Death Valley as an elimination game for playoff contention here. Congratulations. You had to wait a month longer for your precious football game to mean someone doesn't get to play in December and January anymore. I feel so bad for you. Give me a break. That has been one of the more ridiculous subplots of people's thought processes on this in a year especially where we don't have a truly transcendent team. Like, as we go and we can pop me and Dad's projected college football top 12, the teams that we think and how we think the committee is going to order it based on what they value here, You look, Oregon right now is number one for both of us. They're number one in the AP poll, and I think they're going to be the easy number one for the committee going into tonight. I don't think Oregon is heads and tails above the rest of college football the way that we've seen. Ohio State gave them hell on the road. It's why I think Ohio State could be sitting there at the 2 seed right now when you look at their resume. One loss to the number one team in the country, a win over a Penn State team that'll likely still be ranked inside the top 10. I have them at number 6 in this. And so I think Ohio State versus Georgia, when you look at, hey, Georgia with a team a win against Texas on the road, which absolutely matters, but that loss to Alabama and the fashion in which that took place, all of those things factored in, I think this goes Oregon 1, Ohio State 2, Georgia 3, undefeated Miami at 4, followed by Texas, Penn State, Indiana, Tennessee, BYU, Notre Dame, Alabama, and then I have SMU, Dad. Their one loss to undefeated BYU as they were getting ready. We talked to Adam Rittenberg about this before. As they were sorting out their quarterback situation, they get a big-time win over ACC foe Pitt that ultimately keeps them ahead of Boise State in my mind for the committee and the way that they're going to look at this. So I know you viewed it much the same way.
Yeah, well, our top 5 is the same, except we just switch Ohio State and Georgia. You have Ohio State 2, Georgia 3. I have Georgia 2, Ohio State 3. No big deal there. But it changes at 6. You have Penn State. I'm giving Indiana the love and putting them at number 6. And then I'll go Penn State. Then I'll go BYU. Then I'll go Tennessee, Notre Dame, Alabama, and I'm going to keep Boise State at 12 over SMU, though that one I could see easily going either way. So basically we have the same team, save for SMU and Boise State, just a little bit of a different order, especially 5 through 11.
Yeah, I think with Georgia and Ohio State in the debate there, it's largely going to come to, and this will be, I think, the most fascinating plot tonight for me is how the committee views the SEC this year. Because I said the other day talking to Jason Fitz, this feels as approachable as the SEC has felt in years, where early in the season, Georgia went out and walloped Clemson, and we thought it was going to be the same old same, and we've seen all of them show cracks. Ole Miss was supposed to be this talent-filled roster, and we've already seen multiple losses for them. Alabama looks human for the first time. Georgia's got a quarterback throwing interceptions left and right, and so all this has opened it up. Like, you look at all of the things, when the committee gets in this room, for teams that they're debating, like this with Ohio State and Georgia, they're going to obviously have what they've seen from the eye test. They're going to have their resumes up there, which, again, I think looks slightly better for Ohio State given the Oregon ranking. And then they're going to look at some of the relevant statistics. And you look at these teams, Ohio State, the number one overall team in terms of efficiency. They're top 10 in offensive and defensive efficiency, 6th on offense, 6th on defense, versus Georgia that sits 13th on offense and 5th on defense. So it's close enough to where even though you've got that Georgia defensive masterpiece against Texas ringing in your ears, I would argue Ohio State's been a bit more consistent so far this season. The big one resume-wise, guys, is always, though, strength of resume. It's a metric on ESPN.com. You can go and find it pretty easily there. It's the one that in the past was most predictive and most instructive of where the committee was going to rank teams. And right now, Georgia is number 1 in strength of resume. They're even ahead of Oregon, who sits there at number 2, behind then Miami at 3 and BYU at 4. So that is the one thing, Dad, is still the SEC scheduling from the computers is getting that respect. If the committee values it the same way, is the big question going into tonight.
I think the big question for me is, where are the teams close to 12 ranked? Because how easily would they be on the precipice of falling out? Like, I think Penn State's going to be ranked fairly high. Their only loss is to Ohio State. So I think them just kind of sitting there playing out their schedule, not playing in the Big Ten championship, they could find themselves having a home game in the first round. Home game needing you need to be seeded 5 through 8. Tennessee, I'm interested where they put them because I think they're going to get a second loss. They lost to Arkansas. They play Georgia in 2 weeks. Now, AP has them at 7. Does the committee put them at like 9 or 10, where a loss to Georgia may drop them outside the top 12? Or do they keep them in the 6, 7, 8 slot, where a loss to Georgia, especially if it's a good loss, they don't drop out of the top 12, and they could be a 2-loss team that gets into the playoffs? So to me, Charlotte, it's very interesting on where not who's seated, but where you're seated in this initial ranking.
Yeah, I mean, I also think, a question for you guys who you're so in this week to week is this ranking does it become more fluid somehow with the 12 teams that matter more? Because I mean, it's sort of shocking to me. Like, I love what you said about this being a do or die game for Bama and LSU, because I think it makes the whole thing much more interesting to have it just everything builds up more and more. And then you have a game like this that is super consequential. But it seems like everything's kind of convoluted this year, you know, with Georgia losing to Alabama and then beating Texas, and then Alabama looking human in these ways that, as you were saying about the lack of these sort of, you know, clear favorites, it seems like all of this could just keep switching as we go week to week from here, which seems kind of exciting to me. It feels sort of like the first time we've seen that in college football with this format.
It is very true, Charlotte, and it's part of the way the committee is supposed to do this. Every week is supposed to be a blank slate for the college football playoff committee. It's not that way for the AP and the coaches poll that are usually always building. The way the college football playoff committee is supposed to do this, they're supposed to look at this with a fresh start every single week. And I think what you described there, the chaos of this year, comes, Dad, from the fact that in the SEC, we've seen a lot of the good teams all playing each other. And in these other conferences, like the Big Ten, like the ACC, we've talked about the fact that this is just a year where a lot of the rest of the conference is down and the schedules have not lined up in a way to produce a lot of crossover amongst the conference's best teams until late in the season now. And so it gives us this difficult way of trying to legislate a sport that's always had weird scheduling issues because of how big and unwieldy it is.
Yeah, so to me, instead of looking at the top, I mentioned like a Tennessee team I'll look at. Another two teams I'll look at on where they're initially ranked are Texas A&M and Ole Miss, because right now they're 15 and 16. Ole Miss plays Georgia this week. You know, are they close enough to the top 12 that a win over Georgia, if they were to win, puts them in the top 12? Texas A&M plays Texas the last game of the season. Are they just outside the top 12 that if they beat Texas, that would put them in the top 12? Again, two lost teams. We're going to get two lost teams in there. It's just a matter of how many.
I completely agree. So no longer is it a rising tide, pun fully intended, lifting all ships in the SEC. It is the collective here that's now going to be part of how we judge the rest of the sport. But I'm with you. Teams like really the state of Indiana, Notre Dame and IU, where they wind up tonight. There are so many interesting swing states in this one. I'm going to keep hammering the election puns.
Stop it.
You guys are going to like it. Coming up next, though, we talk about the playoff rankings and a little bit about the NFL trade deadline. Coming up next, we'll get to more of the moves made before the deadline and one very important injury in Big D next.
Welcome back to GoJo and Golic. Disappointing news out of Dallas. We're hearing that Dak Prescott is slating to miss weeks with his hamstring injury. He's going to be getting a second opinion, but that's where we're at right now. CeeDee Lamb also has that injury to his AC joint in his shoulder. So, guys, I just want to know, are the Cowboys cooked? Kind of feels like they are, and Jerry Jones is going to be wishing he had somebody else asking these questions instead of me.
Yeah, no, they've been cooked, unfortunately, and this only adds to it in a season where, honestly, all of this goes back to, I know we had all wanted him to potentially flirt with the idea of free agency. Man, I'm glad Dak ended up signing that deal because it would have been hell coming off this. Probably still would have gotten paid because, again, a quarterback of his caliber reaching true free agency is so rare, but for the peace of mind for the player now dealing with this injury that, Dad, while the Cowboys would only commit to him being out at least for this week, it sounds like, according to Adam Schefter, this is going to be multiple with your favorite, the soft tissue injury. For Dak Prescott, at the very least, he can rest easy knowing that he has gotten the money that he earned with his play.
Yeah, and then there was talk about Jerry Jones. Are they going to be buyers or sellers? Listen, if they're going to go anyway right now, it would be sell off parts, not buy parts, because this season, sitting at 3-5, Eagles and Commanders only have 2 losses. This season is done for them. Again, Cooper Rush comes in 2 years ago and was 4-1 in the 5 games that Dak was out. But overall, when Dak's not in there, they're basically a 500 team. So this is just the team was not built correctly, and that's on Jerry Jones, even though he won't admit it. So Charlotte, I mean, they're America's team. They're a team that everybody talks about, but there's not a lot to talk about in a positive way around them right now.
If this team were the Bengals, nobody would be talking about them. If this team were, it is crazy to me that look. First of all, I will say there is some luck involved. Like, you pay CeeDee Lamb, you pay Dak Prescott, they both get hurt. But as you were saying, the way this team has been built, Senior, like, Dak's been getting sacked a lot too. Like, this is the team. I'm sort of at a loss for words when Jerry Jones can sit there and say, I regret this situation for our fans, and be like, but we still got it, and Mike is still my guy. It's like, when are you actually going to do something to change? It's like with the guy in the hot dog costume being like, we're all trying to find the guy who did this. It's like, well, I think you made this happen, and it's not Dak's fault for getting hurt. I'm glad he got paid. I just think that there are so many bigger questions than just a quarterback, but that's like sort of the easiest thing to look at for people, I think. Gojo.
Yeah, no, I would agree. Now, the funniest thing in the world would be if Jerry Jones and the Cowboys actually went out and swung big at the deadline after a whole offseason of lying about being all in, doing nothing, making no changes to a roster that's atrophied so much that the minute something went wrong, everything went wrong, and you started to see all the warts on a roster that in some ways, had been held together. And the reason Dak Prescott was so deserving of the payday is because of how much of the offense was reliant on him to be special last year for all the reasons that we've talked about that are germane to what Mike McCarthy does. It is not an offense that does a ton to help its players. It is one that puts the onus on them to be special, and last year they were, and this year they couldn't overcome some of the deficiencies at its core on the offensive line, like Charlotte mentioned, running and stopping the run, all these simple bare-bones football thing that people had thought we'd abandon, and apparently Jerry Jones had thought we'd abandon based on the way he'd allocated resources. For the guy that was the one that back in the day paid Zeke Elliott before he paid his quarterback in Dak Prescott, to now all of a sudden be the one, like, Dad, we're sitting here at the trade deadline, and the Cincinnati Bengals, it's not a huge move, but they went out there and they traded for Khalil Herbert, who had 8 carries this season for the Chicago Bears, had been lost in that running back room behind DeAndre Swift and Roschon Johnson, but went and tried to do something, because right now the Bengals, I think, are 27th in yards per game in terms of rushing in the NFL. They went and tried something, which is really all Cowboys fans were asking Jerry Jones to do this offseason, was do something in the areas that this team was deficient. And outside of signing Eric Kendricks, they couldn't even do that.
Well, they're going to do something. Per Adam Schefter, Jerry Jones on his radio hit just said that Dak Prescott will be put on IR. So if he gets put on IR, that means he's out till December 9th. If he comes back in the allotted time, the December 9th game against the Bengals, said Bengals who picked up Khalil Herbert. Another team like the Cowboys that really didn't do anything to help the running game. Cowboys didn't. Bengals lost Joe Mixon and really didn't do a whole lot to fix that. So they'll try and do it with Herbert, as you mentioned, just 8 carries. But Dak is going on IR. Cooper Rush will be the quarterback. We don't know about CeeDee Lamb. As Jesse mentioned, has the AC sprain in his shoulder, came down hard on his shoulder. So it is going from bad to worse for the Cowboys.
You know, something that's really interesting to me about the way that Jerry Jones does things is, you know, everything's bigger in Texas. So he makes these very flashy moves. It doesn't seem like there is any sort of in between for him where, as you said, the Bengals got Khalil Herbert. Okay, great. Just go get a few pieces that are not, you know, big splashy spends, aren't a sequin pair of cowboy boots, but will actually do a lot to make your whole team better. And I really think it's like some sort of mental block of like, we're the Cowboys, we do things big, which ends up meaning it either works or it doesn't. And I don't think that that is sustainable. And I will be very interested to see if eventually someone's like, dude, you have to do something. And if they're able to do that.
I just can't wait to see now, because Jerry Jones on 105.3, the same station that he went on and said that Dak Prescott was going to be placed on IR, said they will more than likely add a receiver today at the trade deadline, and said the player was someone they really liked during the draft process when the player came out. So I cannot wait to see what this is. Again, the Cowboys making a move at the deadline as Dak Prescott goes on IR with a hamstring injury after an offseason of doing nothing is one of the funniest possible outcomes, which is exactly why Jerry Jones, a master troll, is going to make sure that he does this at a point where the Cowboys season feels lost, so he can see after, be like, listen, I don't know what you guys wanted from me. I made a move at the trade deadline to help make us better. I'm trying here. I don't know what you're all yelling about.
Yeah, he's the man behind the curtain, except he's in front of the curtain. He's front and center in front of the curtain, trying to wave his magic wand.
And you know what? Mina Kimes, I heard her make this point on Pablo Torre's podcast a while back, talking about Jerry Jones, who gets all this credit for being a savvy businessman despite buying a product that appreciates for everyone, no matter what you do in the NFL, and doing all of these savvy business things. He just likes being famous. And I thought that was such a revelatory point that seems obvious, where we're always attributing all this stuff. Like, Jerry Jones likes the sound of his own voice. He likes being the center of attention in this, as a lot of people do, but he's just got a bigger platform to do it than most. So I feel like we do galaxy brain so much of what Jerry Jones does, but I thought that revelation by her in particular was something that states the quiet thing and the obvious thing very loudly.
Jerry Jones is someone who dresses up a product with all the bells and whistles and builds this new complex with all this art in it. Do you guys know how much art is in that building? It's like crazy how much art he has in that building. And
the weirdest one is in the training facility next door. They've got all these molds of old Cowboy quarterbacks' hands in there. It's deeply weird.
Yeah, so here's a guy who's like dressing this all up. Here's this fancy thing. Here are these amazing cheerleaders that we don't pay, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, if you don't make the core product good, nobody cares. Like, it is not going to work. You cannot dress something up if there is nothing to dress up. And I think so many of these guys, so many of these, you know, billionaire owners skate by on being good businessmen, but they're really just rich. So I don't know.
And listen, from the business side, you do have to give him his credit, because it is the franchise in any sport in the world that's worth the most right now. Now, you have to give him credit.
The players in the 90s made this team famous and great. Jerry Jones didn't do that.
I understand. Listen, he's still a businessman building the park and being the showman that he did. You have to give him some credit for making that team worth $10 billion. I think it would have been worth more anyway, but you have to give him some credit as a businessman. Not as a GM, but as a businessman.
He gets some, but I think we give him too much. I think that's where I land on with all this, is we sort of hyper-fixate on that, because at this point, it's the only conversation that we can have about this Cowboys team. All right, let's finish off the show the way we always do. This, that, the third. 3 quick stories to send you into the rest of the day where you should go vote and do your civic duty. As always, make sure you download, subscribe, rate, and review us. Leave us a 5-star rating. Check the show out live Monday through Friday from 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern on the DraftKings Network. And if you got to miss us live or any of our great guests, thank you to ESPN college football writer Adam Rittenberg for joining us ahead of the College Football Playoff Committee's rankings tonight, and our buddy Charlotte Wilder, who you can catch co-hosting Oddball with me and El Hassan every day but Friday here on the DraftKings Network during the football season. Guys, let's get to this and start off with a story that I know Charlotte's going to love as she is shrouded in fireworks right now on the Zoom call. In NBA action last night, Charlotte, the Detroit Pistons were seen taking the train to Barclays because you had the New York Marathon going on, which congratulations to everybody that ran in the New York Marathon. An awesome accomplishment for them, but an awesome visual of all these really tall guys on a very small subway, Charlotte.
Yeah, this is my favorite thing that happened over the weekend. On Sunday, they just crawled on in and crawled on out. And, you know, I take the subway all the time. I live in New York. The subway gets a bad rap. I think the subway is kind of miraculous. It's like a conveyor belt. You get on, and then all of a sudden you get off, and you didn't have to do anything, and you're just where you needed to be. But when NBA players take it, it did look, there was like clown car vibes where people just keep pouring out. And, you know, I think that we really, as a country, don't do the clown car thing enough anymore. I think that was the height of comedy, and I would like to get back to it. So I'm grateful to Detroit. Also, they beat the Nets, and so maybe they should take the subway more.
But I'm with you on the subway. It is a fantastic way to travel. And I've seen players take it to their respective games. I don't know if I've seen a team, and understandably so, you ain't going anywhere when the New York Marathon's going on. But to see the amount of players ducking to get out of the subway train and not bang their head is hilarious. But yeah, I don't know if I've seen, and I'm sure it's probably happened, I just don't remember, where an entire team was on a subway.
I get, like, it's obviously the quickest way to travel in New York. Like, traffic is just unbearable, so that's why everybody does it. Like, you'll see managing directors at Goldman on the subway because they just don't want to drive. It just takes too long. But it is intimidating if you don't do it regularly. So obviously they had, like, handlers with them being like, get off now. But it's like, if they were just on their own trying to figure that out, I don't know. It could get a little dicey.
I am a huge Subway fan, but you're right. There is some shock to it if you're not a person that's used that as a means of transportation often. It is one of the starkest contracts societally with what I saw this summer when I went to Japan versus being at home here, riding a New York subway versus a Japanese subway, which is the cleanest, most air-conditioned, accommodating place I have ever been to in my life. Order reigns in a mode of transportation that is usually somewhat of organized chaos. And so this one, being able to navigate in a place too, Charlotte, you can speak to this in New York. I don't feel like anyone's really trying to talk to anyone. Like, this had to be the most activity you usually see on a subway that's not someone performing in there, because generally nobody wants to be bothered by anybody else while they're in transit, miserable, usually on their way to work.
You know, I think the most New York thing is that people probably didn't even really pay attention to them, because I was on the subway once and this guy was doing like the most insane yo-yo tricks I have ever seen. Like, it truly blew my mind. And I was the only one looking at this guy. And I was like, you are missing unbelievable entertainment. So I could see this. They're just like, well, a lot of tall people on the subway today, and then go back to, you know,
you're tall and in my way right now. Get out here. I think this is my stop. So
yeah.
Congratulations. They made it through and found a way here. Jesse, let's get to that. Some NFL news we didn't get to today. Christian McCaffrey, sight for sore eyes back at 49ers practice.
Yeah, he went all the way to Germany for that, second opinion, but here he is. He's back. So, does this change your opinion at all, guys, about the NFC West race? How do we feel about the fact that he's back, baby? He's back. Also, Gojo, I had no idea you went to Japan, but yeah. No idea.
Yeah, we had never talked about this at all before in the history of the show. So while I was busy gallivanting around Japan eating God knows what, Christian McCaffrey was over in Germany, where they're getting ready to host a football game this weekend. Oh, by the way, Dak getting extensive treatment on, a calf injury that also bordered into Achilles territory for a guy as dynamic as he is here. I do wonder and worry about his reintegration at this point into the season, but if he comes back and can be even a semblance of what he was before, the added element he gives this 49ers offense is a huge factor in the NFC West arms race that looks really interesting between them and I think primarily the Los Angeles Rams right now.
Oh, obviously him coming back would have helped. But by the way, the man replacing him, Jordan Mason, is the 4th leading rusher in the NFL. So it's not like they've struggled running the ball with an individual. It's just CMC does so much more, lining up in the slot, lining up a wide receiver, a mismatch for who's going to cover him. That obviously, but maybe they can integrate him in more slowly with Mason being able to run the ball while CMC tries to stay healthy for the rest of the year.
You can spell them a little bit more, Charlotte. You can get creative with the two of them. I mean, all the same DNA from the Shanahan-McVay tree exists in Tampa, and you saw last night with Rashard White and then with Bucky Irvin, the way they used both of those guys in the backfield and did different things. So it definitely gives you some options here. But at a bare minimum, Charlotte, one of the best players in the NFL is back on the field, and that's a net positive for everyone involved.
Totally. I think that anytime you have a star like this coming back, it can only be a positive. You know, who knows how he holds up through the rest of the season, but I think it's everything you guys have said. He's so dynamic. He's going to make a difference because, and in some ways, maybe having Jordan Mason get that time without him there will just make both of them stronger together, and you've got more options. So, I mean, if you want to spin it in any way, and I hope CMC can stay healthy for the rest of the season because he's just it's like he bends space and time. It's like physics don't really apply to him, and I just love watching it.
Yep, it has been a season where we have seen that lack of his gravity on the field affect the 49ers and take them from a transcendent offense to a merely very good to great one at times. Dad, you've talked about the difference of this not being a team that gets a lot of yards after the catch. He's certainly, along with a healthy George Kittle and Deebo Samuel, who had dealt with illness during that middle portion of the season. All three of those guys, if they're back on the field together, I'll be interested to see how much of that yak offense starts to come back for this team.
Yeah, listen, I did a game 2 weeks ago with them, and at that point they were second worst in the league yards after the catch, where since Kyle Shanahan's been there since 2018, they've been number 1 or number 2 in the league. So that part of their offense has taken a huge hit, but with CMC coming back, that part will pick up the slack, no doubt about it.
All right, let's get to the third. Normally we reference Twitter as the hell site, but apparently it went oppo for a little bit while the Pope tries to revive one of the worst teams in the league.
Yeah, the Pope tweeted about Saints, like the religious thing, but he did hashtag Saints, which turned it into a football tweet. And so the responses were all about football and everything here. And when I say the Pope, I of course mean his social media team, because I don't believe for a second that the actual Pope is tweeting.
I like the idea that we'd have a deeply online Pope who just decided to get in on the action here. But yeah, you go through the comments and they just fired their head coach, though, Pontiff. Even the Pope is excited that we fired Dennis Allen. Then why have they lost 7 games in a row and had to fire their head coach? There's a lot of questions that I don't know if the Pope is qualified to answer here, Charlotte.
I mean, one of the last lines of his tweet about the hashtag Saints is, God is our Father who loves everyone with boundless love. Obviously, the Pope's wrong. God does not love the Saints. Obviously does not love the Saints or Dennis Allen.
I want to know if, does Derek Carr have anything? He'd gotten Dennis Allen. Well, he didn't get Dennis Allen. Dennis Allen had gotten fired on a team he was on before. So maybe the Pope needs to sage something for Derek Carr for the Saints organization. Can we get the Pope to New Orleans? I feel like he could do a bunch of different things on that visit, get a lot of churches, see a lot of people, and then go just like sage the stadium real quick.
Did you say that the Pope saging?
Yeah, I think that's more of a Wiccan thing. I think that's a little bit of a...
They use the little lantern with the stuff.
Yeah, the incense.
That's not sage, guys.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, listen, I'm Jewish. I don't know what I'm talking about, but it felt right.
I mean, basically, with the incense, it's just sage on a chain is all it is.
I
It's
think
sassy
the
sage.
Pope would object to it, though, because I believe saging has a little bit of, like, Wiccan ties. So, and
witches are great. You know. Maybe, okay, you know what? Forget the Pope. Let's get a couple of witches into the Superdome. Figure it out.
We
to
need
sage, to voodoo. Get the voodoo going. Yes.
Whatever you got to do.
Their lives are an illustration of the good news that Jesus brought to humanity, that the Saints are in the job hunt for a new head coach and potentially a new quarterback next year. Hopefully brought you the good news of this podcast. If you agree, download, subscribe, rate, review the thing. Leave it a 5-star rating. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you guys tomorrow.
Maybe an